Hello, my wonderful viewers, and welcome to another episode of Betty Adams Embers. Today's question is about backstory. Why did John Robinson family originally? We don't know much other than the show is making a subtle thing about this, something that will be important to the backstory later. It's an issue that probably will be addressed if we get a season 3, so get your friends to watch that. Get the numbers up. From what we see in the show, from what we know of John, he left the family to go on long military deployments, which is normal for a Navy SEAL. However, he did not mean these separations to ever be permanent. He clearly feels the guilt of leaving, and Maureen did not want him to go, but didn't ask him to stay. She is furious at him for leaving. She feels abandoned, and they never really told the kids the details. That is about all we know specifically about what happened and what led John to leave originally. So let's look at what we can learn from the characters of the two adults as they've been revealed in the show. We can be pretty sure that there wasn't any extramarital cheating involved. They seem genuinely to love each other, and neither of them seems the kind to hair off in that sort of way. Both Maureen and John are intelligent, dedicated people who stick to what they say they're going to do. In other genres, this would be the obvious direction, but I don't think so for these two characters in this show. So let's look at their canonical character traits. John is big on second chances because he has seen how anybody can do horrible things and probably has. Maureen is self-confident to an almost self-destructive level. She genuinely believes that she can handle anything. She is genuinely under the delusion that she does not make mistakes in her job. As any engineer can tell you, they make mistakes all the time. Even the most brilliant engineers are making mistakes. That's how they learn. So Maureen has a level of self-confidence that is not only greater than most engineers, it's greater than most humans. She genuinely believes that she can handle anything. John is a very traditional sort of guy. He seems the type of guy who would believe the old adage about you should never hit a woman. That kind of thing. You get the impression that he still follows all those old rules of chivalry. Maureen is more of a modern pragmatist. Yes, she's absolutely loyal to her husband and her family, but her concept of gender roles is probably a bit more modern than his. Now, let's look at some of the parallels that the show has been drawing. Specifically, the parallels between John and the robots and Maureen and the rest of the colonists. Now, I believe this is a very good example because Season 2 especially drew several lines of comparison between John and Robot Robinson specifically. And Maureen sort of represents the mentality of the colonists, at least the more scientifically minded ones. Now, the two main robot themes of the show have been that the alien robots are effectively people. They can wonder, love, and feel a desire for family. They care. They are also very dangerous, designed to be warriors. Scarecrow all but destroyed his relationship with Adler for no apparent reason, which really doesn't fit in with either of those. Adler was a friend and ally, so as a warrior, Scarecrow shouldn't have turned on him. And Scarecrow does seem to be able to care, to love, so he shouldn't have turned on him for that. So it was a very out of character for Scarecrow moment. Even our beloved Robot Robinson has very nearly hurt a lot of people, including Will. If you look back to the Moth Chomper scene, when Robot Robinson was in that fugue battle state when he defeated the Moth Chomper, Will took a great risk in calming him down. In both cases, a trained warrior was suffering physical and neurological damage from a crash, was trying to fit into a civilian community again, and has trouble controlling violent reactions that it had honed in a wartime situation. Their failure leads to Scarecrow being imprisoned, and Robot Robinson jumping off that cliff. See, I really don't think that Will ever had the complete control over Robot that the audience assumed at first. I think Robot simply went along with what the decisions he agreed with, and that he agreed with the assessment that he was too dangerous to be part of the community. At least enough so that he agreed to his own temporary deactivation. I'm pretty sure Robot knew his own limits and knew he could come back from his dismemberment-style exile. He had already come apart and been put back together again once in the show, very shortly before this. But Season 2 is where the show makes a point of drawing a strong parallel between John and Robot. They both get trapped down a hole only to be rescued by a Robinson kid and other colonists. They mutiny against their respective command structures, and then both rescue a robot from the other colonists. And throughout the season, they share a lot of subtle beats in the show. John will be doing something in one place, while the robot is doing something very reflective of that in another. And finally, here's my theory. Just like our two beloved robots, John's missions finally caught up with him back on Earth. He was suffering from one too many IEDs going off and crashing his Humvees. He had mental stress damage and probably physical damage from those crashes he had experienced. And he experienced the very natural mood swings, irrational rage, and violence that leads to. These stressors are things that all soldiers endure. They're things we're really only beginning to understand. Back in World War I, they called it shell shock. In World War II, they had a different name for it. Now we call it post-traumatic stress disorder and a few other things. These things are all too real in real life and contribute to veterans having one of the highest suicide rates in the world, because these are men who have been civilized, raised their entire life. They're filled with these inexplicable rage and irrational mood swings, and they turn the violence on themselves. It is a dynamic that people have been trying to educate the populace about. The psychologists, the people who are in charge of healing these returned warriors, they've been trying to educate the public. So this is a dynamic that would be present in the writers' minds. I think what the writers are going for is that in the course of some interactions with Maureen, John snapped and expressed some sort of violence towards Maureen. It's possible that he hit her, but I doubt the show would take it that far. Even if, being a very modern woman, Maureen wouldn't be bound by the old "you never hit a girl" rules. I don't think the show is going to go that far, but there's screaming rage fits, there's other types of emotional violence that is very common in returned soldiers. And to John, the very traditional guy, whatever this was, it would have crossed the line for him. It would have made him consider himself a danger to his family. For Maureen, it wouldn't have. She would have been frightened for sure, but she's a scientist. She would know how PTSD and the associated trauma symptoms works. She would understand that he was experiencing biochemical imbalances that were a natural part of his job. Her response would have been to stay and work through it, to fix him. Robinson stick together. She would have considered herself to be perfectly capable of taking care of her husband, but as the show has repeatedly illustrated, Maureen is not the best at emotional communication. And with John freaking out and distancing himself from the family because he considered himself a threat to him, he would have needed Maureen to give him comfort, to ask him to stay, to reassure him that she still trusted him enough to stay. But Maureen would have gone into this like the engineer that she was. She would have tried to fix him. And to her, that was saying, I love you, I want you to stay, I want this to work. Just like I only try to fix my machines when I want them to work. But to John, that would have meant she saw him as broken. And according to his lights, that means he should leave. And there would have been that mutual lack of communication that dramatic stories love to put into couples relationships. And then John would leave, probably saying that the military doctors could give him better help than he could get at home. Something that would have hurt the very competent, very confident Maureen terribly. I mean, from her perspective, he should know that she was strong and smart enough to handle what was clearly a scientific issue. She had vowed through sickness and health, and she meant it. But she offered him science, not the compassion he needed. And he was looking for her to offer him compassion, but couldn't bring himself to ask for it because he probably didn't consider himself worthy. So he left in this state of miscommunication. Now, while he was off doing violence for country and family, John would be hopefully getting the psych care he needed from the military and dealing with his issues in his own way, allowing in his own mind for his return, earning his return in his own mind. It makes sense that this wasn't something either of them would share with the kids. It would explain why he left within the context of his revealed character, and it would explain Maureen's offense at his leaving, even though she didn't ask him to stay. Pride and misunderstanding getting in the way of communication and relationships, these are very, very common themes. I think the writers did this to give a point of human connections to the robots, to explain the violence and seemingly sudden and irrational rage that Adler described in Scarecrow. If you look at Scarecrow as a veteran with the best of intentions, who is slowly degrading from injuries and lack of proper medical care, his behavior actually makes a lot of sense. He made a friend, but he was losing his capacity to be a functional member of civilization, and Adler just wasn't, as a robot engineer, he would not be trained to recognize the signs of mental degradation that you would get in a living being. This is something that would allow John to sympathize with Scarecrow just as he sympathizes with Robot Robinson so touchingly at the end of season 2. So, that's my theory on why John left and returned to the Robinsons. What do you think? Leave a like if you agree and leave a comment atomizing my arguments if you disagree. Peace out, my wonderful viewers.